Good evening, everyone. I'm David Suddjian, and welcome to Bird Bombs, helpful bursts of ID info. This is episode 26, Spring into Warblers 2. And I'm joined tonight by Laura Stedman, who will be popping in later to help with our Let It Fly segment and to assist with the Q&A. If you do have any comments or questions, be sure to send those in so I can address those for you. And I've been happy to have Laura helping for nearly every one of the 26 Bird Bombs episodes that I've done. She's only missed two, and I've really appreciated that. So spring into warblers. Warblers are every birder's favorites, right? So it's right up there ranking with all the other favorite sorts of birds. Got to be the New World warblers. And they're a sure sign of spring. They are very colorful. Well, not all of them are colorful, but there's a lot of colorful ones. And they come in a great variety. 47 species recorded in Colorado. And many of those are rare migrants. So it is a little touch of excitement there. Some of them very rare. Others are kind of rare, but turn up regularly nonetheless. But there's a lot of good ones to look for. Of course, they're cute and enduring when you get a good look, but they can be challenging to see well and to identify. And warblers make an important part of the breeding avifauna of Colorado, particularly Colorado's forests. So we have 12 warblers that nest regularly in Colorado. So we're definitely focusing on spring tonight. We're going to, all the images in this show are from the period of April to June, and there are no baby birds of the year, anything like that. So we're talking about adults. In some cases, there might be one-year-old birds that we can see that basically look a lot like adults, but that's where our focus lies tonight. And migration is a great time to be looking at warblers because it's the time when we can find the greatest variety, and it can be pretty spicy because there's a lot of rare ones that turn up in Colorado. Vagrant warblers are like these treasures. You go on a hunt, almost like an Easter egg hunt, if you will, but you're looking up in the trees mostly, and it's very exciting to see what you can find, and lots of birders, that's their focus now. And we see the rare birds popping up on eBird and people going to track down these migrant warblers that have stopped in that we've found and enjoying this great variety of rarities. But our bird bombs tonight is going to focus on Colorado's regular nesting species. So that's kind of in the theme of get to know the birds that are the regulars, let those be your reference species. But also, migration is great, but it's only going to be spring migration, only going to be going on for another 2 or 3 weeks or so. And then there's not much of that left. And so we're into the nesting season, and we're going to be looking for our warblers in their nesting settings. That's going to be our focus tonight. And in fact, here's our 12 focal species. They're all in this order Passeriformes and the family Parulidae. So the New World warblers, sometimes called wood warblers, are in the family Parulidae. And it is a rather large family. In fact, it's the biggest family of birds for variety in Colorado is the wood warblers. 47 different species recorded. We do have 12 nesting species that are regularly nesting in Colorado, plus a number of other vagrants have been recorded nesting in the state. It's very impressive to look at the little array of eastern warblers that have turned up nesting in Colorado. We're not going to focus on those ones tonight, but it's kind of cool. So spring migration, mostly mid-April through May. A little bit earlier than mid-April in some cases, particularly towards the southern part of the state, but mostly mid-April through May. And prairie vagrant traps and some of the vagrant spots near the edge of the Front Range and the similar ranges along the edge of the plains are great places to see variety of migrant warblers. Species arrive in their nesting habitats when habitats become suitable or conditions are suitable for them to get there. And since we're looking at the nesting birds, we can note that most of the New World warblers build cup nests, and most of them nest on the ground or on limbs and branches in trees, but two of them nest in cavities. Now, only one of those occurs nesting in Colorado. That's the Lucy's warbler, but we've got a couple cavity nesting warblers, which is kind of cool. So let's take a look at our, Let's take a look at our 12 focal species here. And we can see that there's several different genera represented. And we can notice right away this genus Setophaga has many of the species. And in fact, I think there's 27 different species in that genus that have occurred in Colorado. So I believe the largest genus of largest variety of any genus in our state. So it fits with that pattern of the biggest family occurrence as well. And so we see our 4-letter codes on the right. I asterisked a couple of them that kind of break the standard code rules to avoid overlapping with other 4-letter codes. But the other ones are all pretty standard. So we have this Ovenbird in its own genus, orange-crowned Lucy's in Virginia together in Yellowthroat, and MacGillivrays, common yellowthroat, Geothlypis, and then the Setophaga warblers and the Wilsons by itself out of our focal species in the genus Cardolina. So there's our focal species. And, you know, we have several of these that are named after people. And interestingly, 3 of them after females. And so that's kind of cool. And I think they're really pretty names, although I guess they're destined to be changed. But I put up here the source, or rather the people that those warblers were named after. So Lucy Hunter Baird, Virginia Anderson, and Grace Darling Cowes. Now, I got to say, if we have to nix Lucy, Virginia, and Grace, I want to go with Darling for the warbler. So I'm going to nominate the Grace's warbler be renamed to Darling Warbler. How about that? All right. So one of the first things you start thinking about when you're considering nesting warblers is habitat. And here in Colorado, we have a wide variety of habitats. And if you look on this map, you can see that most of the eastern part of the state is kind of blank of these wooded habitats, which are the feature on this map from the Colorado State Forest Service. Most Colorado warblers nest in forest and woodland habitats. So they're not really open country birds. There's only a couple exceptions of birds that like more non-treed habitats, the common yellowthroat in wetlands, and the orange-crowned warbler is really a shrubland specialist. Although both those species will occur in willow riparian shrublands and things, so a little bit woody, but not quite the treed environments that the other species are looking for. So as we look at the map, let's kind of focus. I just want to draw your attention to a few things among all these colors that are kind of important for birds and for warblers. The ponderosa pine distribution is shown in this kind of pink color on the map, and we see them distributed along the Front Range from Larimer County all the way down into El Paso, and then there's a little break here for the Arkansas River, but it picks up again as we get into the very south central part of Colorado. And we also notice this kind of lime green coloration, and that's representing the pinyon pine juniper woodland, or we call it PJ. All right, so not PB and J, but just PJ. And so we see the PJ habitat prominent in the south central part of Colorado, coming up the Arkansas River, and we see it all along the southwest side of the San Juan Mountains, and on this plateau and mesa area out here in the western part of the state. So a couple important little woodland forest types I just want to call attention to in terms of their distribution. We'll see that played out a little later. So it's good to kind of think about how the birds sort themselves out in different habitats. And most species have principal habitats that they occupy here in Colorado. So we have several species that are mostly associated with wet sorts of places. It could be open water wetlands like the common yellowthroat, or riparian forest that grows along streams, or other things like the MacGillivray's warbler picks out moist little settings in its woodland areas, even if it's away from flowing water, it's looking for that moisture. We call moist habitats, or water habitats can be called, if they're not totally aquatic, then we call them mesic habitats because they're on the wet side. So a number of our warblers, yellowthroat, redstart, yellow, Lucy's, MacGillivrays, and Wilsons are principally associated with these habitats near water. Then we have a few species that like drier places, drier shrublands and woodlands, and we can use the word xeric to describe the dry conditions. So the orange-crowned warbler, Virginias, and black-throated gray are 3 species that are looking for drier settings. Here's some of that pinyon juniper woodland here in the left-hand picture that the black-throated gray specializes in. And we can see some nice Virginia's warbler habitat on the right with the oaks here. And it's actually close to my home. And down here in Park County, some Virginia's warbler habitat on that open slope with oaks and scattered Douglas fir. So that's pretty cool. So then we have some species that are really associated with forest environments. Ovenbird, yellow-rumped warbler, Grace's warbler. These are forest birds here in Colorado. The yellow-rumped is notable for using pretty much all the different forest types that we have that are above a certain elevation, about 7,000 feet or so, for nesting. So it's very Catholic in its choice of habitats, meaning very varied, and so that's kind of neat. On the other hand, the Grace's is really in Colorado a ponderosa specialist. So, and Ovenbird has its certain kind of niche that it's looking for. So the birds are seeking different sorts of habitats where they're going to make their homes. And how does that play out in the landscape on Colorado? So this altitude map, you kind of see three areas. There's a west slope and plateau and mesa type area there, mostly showing in pink with lower elevations, but you can see some plateaus reaching out at more moderate elevations there into that region. And mountain section down the middle of the state, of course, and the high plains occupying the eastern portion of the state. But diversity of warblers is pretty good in the western two sections there, but not so rich in the high plains, as we'll see. So here's some species that we see associated with the plateau and mesa region of Colorado. The majority of our state's nesting species occur in that region of the state. And in that area, you can have a real close proximity of very dry habitats with a river edge where it's moist, but otherwise it's generally a much drier country in a lot of the area. And then in the mountains in the middle part of the state, we have a similar number of species, the same number of species highlighted here, not quite the same mix, but quite a few species in Colorado nest in mountain and western foothill habitats. So very important regions, both of those for Colorado's nesting warblers, but there's only two that make it out onto the high plains for nesting, the common yellowthroat and the yellow warbler, which are very have a broad distribution across the continent. Are finding habitat in a lot of different settings out there in open country and as well as in more treed settings. You can see if you look across these lists that some of the species occur on every one of those regions. For example, the yellowthroat, yellow warbler are occurring in all three of those regions. So it's cool when you go out, if you want to see a lot of warblers right now, best variety, you might head to some migrant traps out on the plains. But later on, as we get just a few weeks down the road, you will not find that great variety out there. So it's a reality of the nesting season here in Colorado. Along the Front Range and the plains interface, we have this set of species that occurs. This view in the picture here is actually basically my backyard. And there are 6 species of warblers that nest in the habitats that you can view in this image, from yellow warblers down in the riparian, ovenbirds in this canyon here, Virginia's warblers on these oak slopes, yellow-rumped warblers up in this forest in the upper part, MacGillivray's warblers down along watercourses and things in this area. So pretty rich with warblers here on the Front Range Plains interface. And it's interesting, if you look at the range maps, and we'll be doing a little bit of that as we go through our species, most of the nesting warblers in Colorado are on the edge of their breeding range distribution. So if you draw that line for their breeding range, that line is going to be passing right through the state. So that's kind of impressive. That's reflecting our interface of mountains and plains largely, but not only that, as we'll see with a few species. So we're right on the edge of things, which is always kind of exciting. It's kind of cool when I'm listening to that MacGillivray's warbler that's singing down here. It's right on the edge of its range. So that's kind of neat. So let's start taking a look at our focal species. So we're going to begin with the one that is the most varied in its habitat associations, different forest and woodland types, and that's the yellow-rumped warbler. And they do come in 2 flavors, if you will, the Audubon's warbler, which is the one that nests in Colorado, and the myrtle warbler, which is nesting across Canada and actually reaches fairly far west, but does not nest as far south as Colorado. So we don't have them nesting, but we have a lot of myrtle warblers happening during migration right now. So it's definitely something we're going to look at along with our nesting subspecies of Audubon's warbler. So here is The distribution from the second Colorado Breeding Bird Atlas, the data was collected 2007 to 2012, so it's not the absolute freshest, but it's still a really great resource for showing distribution. When you look at these atlas maps, the dark blue squares represent places where breeding was confirmed, or blocks where breeding was confirmed. The light blue squares are kind of medium blue, or is a probable evidence, and the palest blue are ones where it's just possible that the bird was nesting through. So you kind of focus on the darker colors for the most part. You can see the yellow rump is distributed throughout the mountain region and pretty broadly at areas where you have elevations, say up above 7,000 feet or so, particularly in the central part of the state. And so has a broad central distribution, occurring in all kinds of different habitats, and all the way up near to tree line, essentially, a little bit below the tree line itself. Usually doesn't like the very highest stuff, but way up there. And you can see one peeking out of its nest here in this cool picture on the right. You see the little eyeball looking over the shoulder of that cup nest. So they build their nest out on horizontal limbs. So the Audubon's warbler, of course, or the yellow rump is the butterbutt, right? So one of the identifying features for this bird that usually you can see pretty well if you're watching it as it's foraging and flipping around in the trees is that yellow rump, which stands out with pretty good contrast, the butterbutt. They also have yellow at the sides of the breast, both males and females, but males generally have a brighter yellow there than the females do. Males have bold black on the breast, but females there have black or dark streaks on the breast without kind of concentrated areas of extensive black. Both have two white wing bars, and you can see on the Audubon's form, like in the upper left, often those wing bars are almost look like they're merged into one giant block of one giant patch of white on the wing there. Sometimes it's more definitively two bars, but you notice a big white patch compared to the myrtle. And the yellow-rumped warbler has bold tail spots, and you see these tail spots when the bird is foraging and flashing its tail open as it's flying from spot to spot. When the tail's closed, the underside looks mostly white, as you can see, with some dark tips if you look over here on these left-hand birds, for example. So if we want to consider our two subspecies, which we can enjoy seeing both of right now for a little while longer as migration is occurring, we can look to the Audubons. On the left here, yellow on the throat, myrtle, white on the throat. Look at the face pattern of these two birds and some of the birds above. You'll notice that one has a very plain looking face and the other has a patterned face. So the Audubon's warbler is the plain one. It has some stuff going on around the eyes, those two little eye crescents, but it doesn't have much of a face pattern, just a plain gray face. The myrtle warbler, in contrast, shows a supercilium extending back from the eye. So here's the supercilium, the line above the eye, and it goes back behind where the Audubon's maybe just has a little fleck of white, but does not have a line extending back. And notice that the myrtle shows a nice mask kind of effect that's set off by that white supercilium and the white from the throat reaching around underneath the cheek patch or ear patch or auricular patch. And so it creates a nice little pattern that's missing on the Audubon's. You can see the same thing plays out with female birds. I don't know if I label them. Here's a female over here, plain-faced Audubon female, and the female myrtle with that face pattern and mask showing. So that's a really good mark to look at. Of course, we also get a lot of intergrades. So these aren't hybrids because these two forms aren't considered species, but subspecies. And so we call their interbreeding results an intergrade. And those birds, one of the best ways to tell them, and they're not uncommon if you look carefully at the warblers you're seeing, one of the best things to do to pick out an intergrade is to look at the throat. You can look closely at this, you'll see there's yellowish wash in the middle and white mostly around that. And you can have a variety of different mixes there. There could be other features of the birds that are intermediate, but that's one of the easiest ones to focus and pick out on. So when you see a white-throated myrtle, see if you can see actually some yellow on there if it's not all the way clean white. So here's our most varied, the yellow-rumped warbler, also one of our, right during migration, far and away the most common warbler that we encounter in the spring. And it's also one of our earliest spring migrants. So we're still waiting for other ones to show up. The yellow-rumps are already pretty numerous. So, pardon my. All right, so Grace's warbler is our next of our focal species. And as I mentioned, this is a ponderosa pine associated bird. They like park-like stands of mature pine forests with grassy openings, often oaks underneath if they're in a part of the state where the yamble oak occurs, or other shrubs. And here on the map from the Breeding Bird Atlas 2, you can see the Grace's warbler is a southwestern Colorado species. Right, so it has two principal areas where it occurs, down here in the southwest, in the ponderosa pine belt, and out here on the Uncompahgre Plateau, out here on the southwestern portion of the San Juans and just to the west there on the northwest and Uncompahgre Plateau, and another little patch of Grace's warblers that occur in the ponderosa forest that extends from here, Custer County, Huerfano into Los Animas County is another little area. So they're following the ponderosa pines in Colorado, but they don't reach as a regular occurrence far north into our northern ponderosa pine areas from Larimer, say, to Jefferson, Teller, El Paso. We do get them as a rarity up in that part of the state, but we don't find them breeding up there. However, the Grace's warbler seems to be expanding a little bit in some regards in Colorado, so it's one to be watching for in some new areas. They build their nests out among dense needles, way out on limbs, not close to the trunk, and can be pretty hard to locate. So this is a warbler that has a gray face or head with a yellow supercilium. Now the males have black there near the eye, a little black at the lores and black extending a little bit around the eye and just in that part of the face. The females are just gray there. Otherwise, the males and females look very similar, generally similar in the Graces, the males being more darkly marked with black and a brighter yellow, more extensive than the female, but the general pattern is very similar. So that gray face with a yellow supercilium and yellow throat and breast. And notice those dark streaks coming down the sides and flanks, 2 white wing bars, tail spots. But the face pattern and breast pattern are some of the most distinctive things for the Grace's warbler. As I said, this is a ponderosa pine specialist in Colorado. So during the nesting season, you pretty much don't find them in any other forest type. And they like mature, open kind of park-like stands and really fun birds to find. And they share the same habitat with nesting yellow-rump warblers, and their songs are not too dissimilar. So they're occupying the same areas, and but the one has there are some differences in the songs. We won't worry about that now. So our next focal species of breeding bird is a special one, I think. If you open up your Merlin app, I like this because I use this in the field when I'm with groups, and you look at the map, and it's got this big swath of color for the main breeding range of the ovenbird. And then down here in Colorado, along the central part of the Front Range, it has a little ovoid blob of color representing this isolated area where ovenbirds nest, well away from the rest of the species distribution. And that's kind of illustrated here on this map a little bit. Ovenbirds nesting from Larimer County area down into El Paso County and down actually all the way down into Los Animas County, down in this area here. So they're occupying that margin of the Front Range and similar ranges further south. And it's really the lower area of those hills where they come down near the plains. So they don't get very high up up into the elevations or anything, but they're mostly down below, say, 7,700 feet and even lower down close to the very base of the foothills. So the ovenbirds are really a cool bird because they're very vocal. The males sing very loudly, and you can hear them a long way away. Their song is often rendered as teacher, 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 teacher. And you can see in the sonogram, the spectrogram here, you can see the little kind of chanting quality, teacher, 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 and kind of growing in intensity as it goes along. They're very loud, but they can be remarkably hard to spot in their forest habitats. and people often will use recordings to try to draw them around, but a little patience, you might get to see them, but they can be like a forest phantom and very difficult to spot. I love this image of an ovenbird nest. So they get their name because they build a nest that kind of looks like a mini oven, if you will. You got to use your imagination on that part, but it has a little opening towards the side. It's built on the ground, and they cover over the top with material, sometimes hiding it with leaves and things like that. Ovenbird nests pretty hard to find, and it's very hard to find the birds on the ground because they are kind of secretive, but that is where they spend a lot of their time foraging, is down on the ground. So Ovenbird is, when you get a decent look, it's not too hard to identify, pretty distinctive with that very bold white eye ring. Complete eye ring, and the crown pattern with an orangey stripe down the middle and darker stripes on the side. And then the underpart, so beautiful, always recalling to me a little bit like a wood thrush, with the very white underparts and those splotches and streaks of dark blackish coloring make the ovenbird a very distinctive appearing bird. It's not a small one as far as the warblers go. It's pretty decent size. Um, and so they're not too hard to identify when you get a decent look. Their upper parts are unmarked, kind of an olive brown, depending on lighting, what that looks like. Ovenbird, really fun bird. They're just coming into Colorado right about now. So they're not coming in generally in April, but looking for that second week of May. They'll be up on the hills above where I live. So maybe I need to go out and listen for one. So as I said, they forage on the ground, but they sing up in trees. And the singing birds are really can be a real challenge for us birders to spot when we're in their nesting habitat. I want to actually pop back because I don't want to skip over the habitat association with this ovenbird, which I didn't mention. So they're kind of interesting because they have a mix of elements that are normally present where they are in their Colorado range. Either ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, aspen are often present, and an understory of Gamble oak is pretty common as well. So those different things mix together, and they select spots that are shaded, sort of near drainages on the slopes above a stream, that kind of thing, but not like necessarily along major streams, but they're looking for more minor ones. So when you're seeing ovenbirds or hearing them, often you'll notice, hey, there's a drainage swale here. It might be just a little minor little dip or something more serious, but they have an association with slopes above drainages. Okay, so orange crown warbler, it's one of those ones, not quite as bad as the ringneck duck, which in my opinion has no ring on its neck. But the orange crown warbler's crown is very difficult to see any orange. And when you do see it, usually you see something pretty subtle. I don't even have any pictures here that are illustrating it because you really don't see it that much. So don't worry about seeing the orange crown for ID on the orange crown warbler. Let's look at where they're distributed. So the orange crown warbler is a western warbler here in Colorado. It really doesn't make it up into the mountains proper. Is looking for some valley areas that reach up into the mountains, but it's more of a bird of the open country in the west, open shrublands and willow shrublands and things like that. And they build a nest usually on the ground, and they'll hide it underneath grasses or woody stems, but the nest down on the ground, as you can see in this cool illustration of an incubating female looking out. The orange crown warbler is one of our drabber warblers. So right away, if you're not getting a strong pattern or any good coloration, just kind of a general yellowish, greenish, kind of grayish thing, then you might immediately start to think about the orange crowned warbler. So drab olive yellow, lacking any wing bars or any bold markings, really. The only kind of markings that we do see are distinctive. On the face, you can see it has two eye crescents that are split by a dusky eye line. So both those features are a little bit subtle, not really stand out. But you can see that dusky eye line dividing what could be an eye ring into two off-white eye crescents. So that little pattern is distinctive. And as you're looking at the birds in the trees, when you're looking at warblers, it's often helpful when you can to get a look at the face. Face and the breast are two really important areas in many species. But if you can get a look at the face, you can identify pretty much nearly all of them with some certainty. And so when you're seeing that kind of combo of that dusky eyeline with the split eye crescents, then that's a good sign for the orange crown. The only other really kind of marking it has is even more subtle, and there's some indistinct dusky streaks on the breast that really don't amount to much. But you can see the upper parts are really plain and unmarked, kind of olivey green. The bird's a little more yellowish underneath. Some of the birds have a slightly more contrasting head. For example, the one here on the upper right, a little grayish head. Some of the subspecies of the orange-crowned warbler we say are gray-headed forms. Other ones, particularly the Pacific coastal form, lutescens, is not gray-headed. It's kind of yellowish green-headed, much brighter. But the ones that nest in Colorado are gray-headed, but the amount to which that gray shows up depends a little bit on lighting, and it's not always that obvious. But the ones that breed in our state are of the subspecies Orestera, and it's one of the gray-headed forms. So you want to be ready for that little bit of gray-headed contrast. Don't let it lead you to a Nashville warbler or something, because this bird doesn't have an eye ring. It just has those eye crescents and not nearly so bright underneath. I have the song image of the sonogram down here, and what I like about this is it shows the twisting pattern. That's how I interpret it. The orange crown has this trill, and it goes along and it drops and twists, and so kind of a distinctive pattern there for the orange crown warbler. Okay, so in the same genus we have the Virginia's warbler. And this is a bird that is associated with oaks and drier, kind of open wooded slopes. And they are already coming back here in Colorado. They're already occupying the habitats that they're going to nest in. And we can see they have a distribution that kind of combines some of the elements we've been talking about, occurring along the Front Range edge and lower foothills, and extending here up the Arkansas River into some PJ habitat, and then at the western slope, but not really much up in the mountains proper. So they don't really range up too high or get away from the reach of the oaks. And that's kind of their realm. Their nest is placed on the ground, like the orange-crowned warbler. So this is a gray, kind of subtly marked warbler. The standout things are some patches of yellow and that nice clean white eye ring, and recalling a Nashville warbler eye ring. The yellow on the bird can sometimes be hard to see. The female is drabber than the male, has less yellow on the breast, but there's yellow on three places. There's yellow on the breast, is kind of a diffuse patch. Then there's yellow on the rump area, kind of peeking out here from the wings, and there's yellow on the undertail coverts. So you have three places you can look for yellow, whether you're looking at the top or the bottom of the bird. They have an additional color, which is a little chestnut patch, most pronounced on well, it's on the male. And so sometimes it's very obvious, like this bird on the lower right showing a lot of chestnut, but more often you see something that's just a suggestion, like this bird here, to the left of that bright one, with a little bit of chestnut showing on the crown. You can see a little bit over here if you look close. So a lot of times you don't notice that, but sometimes you do. But look for those yellow patches, a kind of plain gray coloration with the eye ring standing out. The upper parts are unmarked. There's no wing bars, there's no streaks, nothing really going on there. This is a bird that is down in the shrubs, and it's up singing high up in the canopy of the trees that are in the habitats that it's occupying. So here's our pinyon juniper, or PJ specialist, the black-throated gray warbler. Beautiful bird. We don't get so many of them over along the Front Range area of Colorado. You can see them right now during migration, but it's kind of a special one to find because we won't see very many over here. You have to go west, or at least to some PJ habitat, to encounter these guys regularly. And they're very common in the pinyon juniper woodlands. There's a nice area of occurrence associated with the Arkansas watershed here in PJ Forest there. And then pinyon juniper is a prominent part of the woodland scene out there in that plateau and mesa region of Colorado. And that's where the black-throated gray comes into its own. And I love looking at these various pictures. The birds are perched on the trees, not just on this page, but the other ones as well. They're perched on the kinds of trees that these species are associated with, which is a beautiful image to think about. So the black-throated gray is a nester nest up in the trees, usually out from the trunk, but sometimes in a crotch of main stems. And this is really, as you can see, it's a black, gray, and white warbler with one little yellow highlight. So that bold black and white face pattern and black, gray, and white elsewhere. And then the little yellow spot on the lores is evident on both sexes. And see that little dot there? So the lores is the area between the bill and the eye, right? So they have a little yellow spot there. Watch for that. Females are drabber overall. The males are, pretty distinctive, and given a good look, you're probably not going to be led astray on what you're looking at. But the female can be a little dingier looking, a little drabber. Here's a female on the lower right, another one in the top center. They tend to just have a bar of blackish across the breast and a white throat. So a little different from the male, and generally a little more drably marked in other regards than the male is. So gray above, 2 white wing bars, like the same genus as the yellow-rumped warbler, and they also have prominent tail spots, white tail spots, so showing up as a lot of white on the undertail and the closed tail, black streaks at the side of the breast, of course. So now kind of switching environments really sharply from the dry pinyon juniper woodland to wet habitats. This is I call this a water warbler. They're not totally in water, but they like habitats where standing water is present, whether in a stream or a wetland. So these are birds that are associated with emergent wetlands, so marsh areas. They also like low willows, often found right along open water. And you can see in their distribution across the state that kind of reflects a kind of, imagine, wetlands occurring in little patches here and there. And sometimes, especially along drainages and things, we can see a row of occurrence along the Arkansas, a row of occurrence along the South Platte, there in the eastern part of the state. But the scattering of confirmed blocks without a clear area of main distribution is typical of what you would expect for a bird that's keying into scattered wetland kind of habitats. The yellowthroat nests near the ground and often in some dense vegetation. It's pretty hard to find their nests. The male is obvious with that bold black mask bordered by white and the bright yellow underneath. So there's usually no mistaking what you're looking at when you see the male yellowthroat, although they are skulkers and they can hide in their dense vegetation. The female, though, is a lot drabber. She has a plain face with subtle eye arcs and a short dusky eye line. And it even almost recalls a orange-crowned warbler, particularly, depending on lighting and so forth. This picture in the middle right, it almost recalls to me an orange-crowned warbler. But the shape of the bill is different. It's a bigger bill, and it doesn't quite have the same brightness to the eye arcs. The tail's a little longer. Yellowthroats often hold their tail up just a little bit, as you can see in this bird. Different shape, too. It's a plumper bird compared to the skinny, slim, trim orange-crowned warbler. The song of the yellowthroat, it gets rendered as witchety, 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 witchety. And it definitely has that quality, and it kind of ends with a woo. So you can see on this little sonogram, it's like a witchety, 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 woo. Everyone smiles when you see an American redstart. They don't fail to delight anybody, whether it's the black, orange, and white male or the yellow, gray, and white female. They are a delight to look at both for their activity and for their coloration. So the redstart is one that has a rather limited solid breeding range in Colorado. It's not a common breeder in Colorado. They're always kind of sparse. There may be particular spots where you'll have more than one pair, but they're generally pretty thinly distributed. From the Atlas 2 map, we see a concentration of stuff here, Boulder, Jefferson, Douglas, and they actually breed all the way down along the edge of the Front Range and similar more southern ranges and up more towards Larimer as well. The Redstart occupying this area, but they also can turn up during the breeding season. I'm not sure about confirmed breeding records, but can turn up out kind of broadly across the central western portion of Colorado as well. But I like to think of them as Chatfield State Park Gallery Riparian Forest Specialists. There's wonderful places there. In fact, the picture down on the right is from their breeding spot there at Chatfield. And you find them in riparian forest. So generally riparian forest with mature trees. So not just little low willows, but some mature trees with shade and an understory, fairly good understory of shrubs and small trees. So they like to forage down in the understory, not uncommonly. They build an open cup nest that's placed in a crotch and tree. I'm just going to skip back here to this picture because I love this one from Rob Raker of this female yellowthroat peeking out from these stems while she's sitting on her nest in a box elder here at Chatfield State Park. So males, again, with kind of like the yellowthroat, if you get a decent look, there's no mistaking what you're looking at. The female is a little more drab, though, and she can be challenging, especially if you're not getting a great look or she's not very close or the lighting's poor or whatever it is. She's much more subtly marked, but she has the same sort of patterns. So notice on the male, we have yellow in the wing, orange in the wing, orange at the base of many of the tail feathers, not all of them. You can see on the spread tail, the central feathers are lacking orange. And then there's orange patches kind of fading to a paler color along the sides and flanks. And the female has color in those same areas. So in the wings, on many of the tail feathers, and along the shoulder area here or the sides of the breast. So same pattern as the male. And these birds do a lot of fanning of their tail and flipping it upward. And I've read that it's used to help them flush prey, little insect prey. But as you're watching it as a birder, you see the beautiful bird and the tail action is just totally delightful, and a smile is on your face, I guarantee it. So the first year male is kind of interesting. I put a couple images of first year males. So in some of the warblers, it takes more than 2 years, or it takes 2 years for the young males to attain a full adult plumage. Now, if you were to see a 1-year-old male American redstart in spring and summertime, you're going to see bird that has splotches of black in various sort of patterns, kind of irregular. And it's developing coloration of the male, but it really looks a little bit more like the female coloration. So splotchy black on the breast and up on the head, where that's going to be all black the next go round through the calendar cycle. But when it's the first year male has those interesting patterns that can kind of catch your attention. But again, look for the color at the shoulder, color on the tail, color in the wings, typical of the American redstart. These birds have a very high-pitched song, or relatively. All right, so one of the ones that is one of the more widespread species in Colorado is the yellow warbler. Take a look at that map, breeding yellow warblers occurring over pretty much the entire state of Colorado. This is a riparian woodland and shrubland associate, very strong association. Some of our areas in town, they find the big trees that are planted in towns and suburban areas sometimes to be suitable, but mostly we'll find them along rivers and creeks and in willow patches and up in the mountains in willow car habitat. Willow car are kind of small to large patches of willow that are generally not so much along linear stream courses, but occupying kind of patches and areas. And it's various other small trees grow with the willows in willow car, but it's a very rich habitat for warblers with MacGillivrays and Wilsons and yellow, and very fun spot. So willow car up in the mountains. The yellow warbler nests place its nest on an upright fork of a large tree or in a shrub, and of only at a fairly moderate height, not very far up in the tree usually. So yellow from one end to the other, from the front of the face all the way to the tip of the tail. Take a look at this flying bird on the lower right. Yellow, 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 yellow. Now, they're not entirely yellow because if you look a little more with a little more discrimination, you'll see that there are darker areas on the flight feathers, on the tail. You can see here in this lower left that the yellow is really just along portions of the tail feathers. When the tail is spread widely, you'd be able to discern that. And there also is a little bit of a wing pattern thing going on with some darker centers on these secondary coverts that create a little bit of a wing bar pattern there. But it's yellow wing bars on a yellow bird with yellow out to the tip of the tail. See the yellow going all the way to the tip of these tail feathers? That's a good field mark when you're looking at the bird overhead. The males are really bright and they have reddish streaks. The amount of reddish streaking varies. You can see some variation just on these pictures, the one on the right here not having a whole lot of it, and some of these other ones being more strongly marked with the reddish streaks. The females are duller yellow. They're still the same yellow overall, and if they have any hint of streaks, it's really kind of just that. It's kind of a hint of streaking. Notice those yellow wing bars and a yellow eye ring. So you don't see the yellow eye ring too much because there's yellow on yellow, but it actually is a feature you can appreciate when you see the birds well. Yellow eye ring and yellow wing birds on a bird that's yellow from the front to the end of the tail. Their song is a sweet one. I always learned it and remember it as sweet, 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 I'm so sweet. Of course, they say it much, much faster than that. It doesn't really sound like that, but you can see that kind of pattern here. Sweet, 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 I'm so sweet. Sweet, 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 I'm so sweet. We'll drop. This is along with the yellowthroat, this is the warbler that is out on the plains in Colorado. So another nearly all yellow warbler, but not quite the same because it has a kind of greenish tone above, is the Wilson's warbler. And I think of this as a willow warbler. So not a willow warbler like the species willow warbler, which is an old world warbler, but a willow warbler because you almost, in the breeding season, when you see Wilson's warblers, they're nearly always in close association with willows. And often in willows is all there is. They also are a high elevation specialist. So they come into their own from 10,000 feet up. All right. So they're really not a lower elevation species in the mountains in Colorado. For example, in Jefferson County, which definitely gets up into the mountains a little ways, the Wilson's warbler is pretty much absent as a breeder. We don't get high enough here in this county near the Front Range edge. But you get up higher, you can find Wilson's warblers going all the way up to tree line. This lower right picture is at 12,000 feet at Kite Lake. And the foreground is all mats of low willows that has nesting Wilson's warbler, along with white-crowned sparrow and Lincoln sparrow and fox sparrow sometimes at that spot. So that's its primary habitat association is willows. It builds its nest at ground level at the base of a small tree or a willow or a shrub or something, often hidden by overhanging vegetation. So I was talking all that about distribution. So here you can see the mountain association of the Wilson's warbler. Really, all those breeding conformations are in mountain areas, the San Juans down here and the various other ranges, and more sparsely perhaps down and along here, but really associated with mountain areas with some good elevational component. So they're all yellow underneath. The yellow doesn't go to the tip of the tail like on the yellow warbler. And unlike the yellow warbler, which you'll often see foraging well up in trees, the Wilson's tends to hang down kind of low. So you're generally not looking at the underside of them as much as looking at them sideways or even down on top of them. And that unmarked olive yellow parts, unmarked olive upper parts are very kind of plain and typical of the species, and they really set off that nice little black beanie or yarmulke or black cap that the male Wilson's warbler has. The female has the same pattern on her head as the male, but the coloration is a little different. So notice the male has a black cap and a yellow supercilium, kind of a broad supercilium. That's what I'm going to call that. The female has kind of a dusky cap. Sometimes it's more blackish than this, but generally not solid black. but she has that same broad yellow eye line. So she's a little harder to recognize right away, but notice that face pattern, and along with that, a beady black eye. So surrounded by the yellow there and kind of set off that way, the beady black eye really kind of stands out. These two pictures amid the vegetation, you can see the bird staring back toward the camera with that eye really kind of standing out. So you get that beady look with a black cap or a dusky cap with the broad yellow supercilium, and that's pretty good for Wilson's warbler. Another thing this bird likes to do is hold its tail up, a little cocked upward. You can see in some of the central images here, the tail kind of cocked up, very typical posture for the Wilson's warbler, and it kind of flips its tail around a little bit. So distinctive posture as well as that distinctive head pattern. It's a small warbler as well. And they're only just starting to trickle in. As I said, they're a high elevation breeder in the state, and they don't rush to get here real early. This one is a special one. The Lucy's warbler is currently expanding its range in Colorado. I have a publication called Birds of Western Colorado Plateau and Mesa Country. And in that book, it cites from 2004, it has just 2 records of Lucy's warbler from that region of the state, which is their home region. But they've actually been expanding since then, and we'll look at that a little bit more. Here's the map from Birds of the World species account, and you can appreciate how much at the very margin of the range of the Lucy's warbler Colorado is. It's a little extension from the southwest, reaching into the southwest part of the state and along the western margin. So the atlas happening when it did, ahead of a lot of the recent range expansion, didn't capture its current range quite as well as eBird does. You can see some records there from the Yellow Jacket Canyon area there in Montezuma County, way down in the far southwest corner, close to Utah. I'm going to be there with a DFO field trip in about a week and a half. Looking forward to seeing Lucy's warblers there. But now, if we look at the eBird map, we can see a number of records elsewhere and extending further in along the McElmo Creek down here, and that Yellow Jacket Canyon is over in here. And so McElmo Creek, extending back to Cortez, now has quite a few Lucy's warblers, and they're at various other pockets as you go up along the Utah border area. This beautiful Gateway Mesa that I have illustrated here is this place up here on the eBird map near the northwest side of the Uncompahgre Plateau, and Lucy's warbler has nested up there as well. Kind of cool thing is they occur in a pretty good density where they occur, and you can have quite a few. Even though they have a very limited range in Colorado, there can be quite a few individuals that you can find in an area while you're birding. They nest distinctively in tree cavities. Oops, I guess I don't know what happened to my tree cavity picture. Maybe it's going to appear. There it was. I'm going to go back to there because my animation has made it disappear, but they build a cup nest inside the tree cavity, and they often like to build it up so that when the bird is incubating on the nest, it can actually see out the hole. So not buried down deep in the hole, but they'll build it up so that they can look out. And it may be in a cavity or maybe behind slabs of loose bark, not unlike, say, a structure of a different structure, but sort of like a brown creeper might be looking for sometimes. But behind loose slabs of bark or in a cavity, a unique situation for the Lucy's warbler here in Colorado. So this is one of the very smallest of the New World warblers, certainly the smallest of our regular species here in Colorado, and small and compact and rather plain. So overall, an unmarked pale gray with a buff tinge to the underparts. Kind of the only color on the Lucy's warbler is on the crown. There can be some little chestnut streaking up there. And on the upper tail covert area, rump area, there's a chestnut patch there, which can be hard to see when the bird has its wing closed, like in the lower center image there. So mostly a gray bird, pale buff tinge underneath, and those little bits of color. Notice it has a subtle little supercilium extending back from the eye and a subtle little eye ring that can show up more prominently in certain in certain lighting and situation than other spots. This bird turns up rarely along the Front Range area and in eastern Colorado, and always generates a lot of interest when it does turn up, because it is a rarity for us away from that southwest corner of the state, or now the Utah margin. Okay, our last of our focal species, the MacGillivray's warbler. This is a bird that likes wet spots, and they have a pretty broad western distribution, low down in the hills as well as up in the mountains, quite a ways up. They use all kinds of different montane shrublands, oak scrub, riparian woodland, willow carr, places that are moist. And in the forested settings, they're going to pick a little spot where there's some wetness in the understory, maybe a spring coming out or whatever, amid aspens, for example. And they nest on or near the ground, and nest pretty well hidden away. These are real skulkers. It's hard to see them well, except for the singing males, which are perched up in a prominent spot often. When I went through looking for female images, there aren't so many. There's a lot of images of males, not so many images of females, because they're not so easy to see. They really do hide. The males have this nice dark gray hood with some black highlights at the lores and black across the base of the throat, top of the breast. The female has the same hooded pattern, but it's much drabber. It's a lighter gray, and she's lacking the black in the lores and the black across the breast. Unmarked olive upper parts, kind of moderately bright yellow underparts with a little duskier at the side. And the MacGillivray's warbler is pretty distinctive with those white eye crescents on a dark hooded bird. So of course the sister species with this is the mourning warbler, which has a much less pronounced eye crescents, a little bit different pattern on the hood. But MacGillivray's warbler, a skulker with eye crescents, and a hooded warbler. They have kind of a two-part song that's I think it's like a choo 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 boo boo, choo 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 boo boo. All right, so we took a tour through a bunch of habitats. We've looked a little focused look at 12 of our Colorado nesting species, and now it's time to let it fly. And so I'm going to invite my partner here, Laura, to come on board. And are you all set, Laura?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So that was a little quick tour, but I know that some of these are pretty familiar birds, and other ones maybe you don't see so much. Like where you live, I know you don't have any Lucy's warblers showing up with any regular time basis, so you have to go
Yeah,
look for
sure.
them. But we'll start out with some that maybe aren't as uncommon as that, but see what you can do. So here's some images of 4 different warblers, and we'll start with number 1, if you would. So what do you see
Yeah.
there?
So number one, the things that jump out to me are a yellow face, a beady black eye, and that black cap, kind of an olive back. The black cap for me is really the kind of the giveaway that's a Wilson's warbler.
All right.
And having that yellow that kind of goes up above the eye and kind of back behind it
That
as well.
broad supercilium, a distinctive pattern, huh?
Yeah, yeah. So number two is a very differently colored warbler. And I see black and white and gray, and then I see that little yellow dot there on right there by the beak in between the eye.
At the lures.
Yeah, so black and white warblers, the ones that we've discussed, it's the black-throated gray, right? If I was out birding, I might, if I only see part of this bird, I might think like, oh, could it be a black and white warbler? But seeing that little yellow dot there, and of course the different sort of streaking pattern and overall look seals it for me for black-throated gray.
Fine.
All right, number three. So this one, an interesting thing with this one is like it looks like it's kind of sitting over some water and some sticks. So I'm in riparian area. It's a very yellow bird. And the other thing I noticed about it is you can't really see the full face, but it's just yellow. just yellow everywhere, right? And
Yeah.
I don't see any gray on the head that might indicate it's something else. There's no eye pattern, no either circle around the eye or eye arcs. So for me, this is a yellow warbler. If it had some of those other things, I might think like, oh, could it be an orange crowned if I hadn't had a good look at it yet? But
How do you know
that's
this isn't a female Wilson's?
female Wilson's, yeah. So it doesn't have any dark on that head. And you were talking earlier about how even the female Wilson's warbler has kind of that yellow eye arc with some dark above it.
Right.
And the back coloration is a little different too.
More yellow and
Uh,
yellow going all the way out to the end of the tail feathers. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, right.
Cool. Yeah. Why isn't it an orange crown warbler?
Why isn't it an orange crown warbler? So an orange crown warbler typically has a little bit of eye arcing going on with it around the eye. Um, they don't look like that on the back. I don't know how else to put it. There's more olivey tones in it, and
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Not so much yellow above.
yeah. There's no orange crown on this bird, so
That's
clearly.
there you go. Oops, I gave it
Oh,
away.
oh, I didn't
You
look.
didn't see that.
I knew it already. So this is
Yeah.
number 4. So when I look at this bird, I see, okay, it's singing. That's cool. It's got a gray head, and I see that olive back, kind of yellow underside. The thing that really jumps out at me is that it's really, really dark eye with the white um, crescents, the sort of broken eye ring. It's not a full round eye ring like some other birds might be, but that gray head with the broken crescents makes it MacGillivrays.
All right. I like how the toes look like they're kind of relaxed. They're just kind of hanging down on that
Yeah,
bird. It's kind of cool.
it's really just like chill and ready to go.
All right, well, let's try our next shot here. Now, this is a little more difficult because there's stuff in the way, and isn't that usually how it is?
Yeah,
When
for
you're looking
sure.
at warblers, you got sticks and leaves and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, okay. So the first one, we've got a bird with a yellow throat, yellow sort of chest. I see olive on the back. I've got a black sort of face mask. There's no like eye ring or anything going on, and I see some white on it. So that is a common yellowthroat, and I can practically hear it saying witchetty, witchetty, witchetty.
Yeah, that black mask is really distinctive,
Yeah, it's
even with an obscured view.
like a little pirate or something. So then number 2, moving on, definitely I can feel my neck starting to hurt from looking up at this bird. I see a lot of pale on the underside. So I'm already ruling out orange crown. I'm ruling out yellow warbler. I see dark kind of at the chest where the neck hits. I see a whitish throat, and I see yellow kind of at the wing pits, armpits. Um, so even though we can't see the top of this bird, I'm calling that a yellow-rumped warbler, and it looks like a myrtle,
With the white throat.
a white throat. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't see any yellow up in that throat.
The
You
white
can also
tail
see that tail. Yeah, you see that kind of pattern on the tail. That's yellow-rumped as well.
showing a lot of white on the closed tail that would show as tail spots, we call them, when the bird fans its tail as it's foraging around. It's easy, not easy necessarily, but it's one thing when the bird is like in this picture and it's still, but in real life, this bird would not have stopped moving.
No,
And you're like, oh, wait,
for
wait,
sure.
wait. A little more challenging. So, yep, yellow rump warbler. How about this third one that's kind of
Yeah,
stealthy?
yeah. So this third one is classic warbler look. It's obscured, but we can see a few details. I see a lot of black on this warbler. So again, like we can immediately rule out the yellow warbler, the orange crown warbler. Other things that we might be expecting and kind of start narrowing it down. Seeing the black, it's got a pale kind of white belly. But the thing that really stands out to me is that kind of orangish uh, uh, wing bar, and then on the tail, that kind of orange running down the sides, and that makes it a redstart.
Now, in this picture, the lighting is such and other factors may be associated with artifacts of the photo that orange doesn't really stand out as much as we might see in
Sure,
real
yeah.
life. But the pattern is still there with the patch on the wing, like a wing bar, and the patch at the base of the tail or the inner part of the tail feathers. So
Yeah, with
with the
the
black. Yeah,
black kind of on the end of the tail too.
yeah, yeah.
Kind of
Great.
stands out.
American Redstart. All right. Well, here's one that's out in the wide open.
Okay, yeah, so this is kind of a more drab bird compared to the other ones that we've looked at. So I'm immediately kind of thinking, you know, is not a male common yellowthroat, could it be a female? It's not a male Wilson's warbler, could it be a female? Um, it's not a male yellow warbler, could it be a female, right? I'm kind of starting to think like that stuff, or is it something different still? It's not a Wilson's Warbler because it doesn't have any of that like yellow cap, yellow band beneath a darker cap, right?
Right,
Um, it's not a yellow warbler because it's not all yellow.
right.
It's kind of dingy. And what was my other bird that I suggested?
Oh, I
I've
forget.
forgotten. But the thing that stands
A
out to
yellow, you
me,
think you mentioned yellowthroat.
yellowthroat. Yeah, so it's not a yellowthroat. The things that stand out to me about this bird are it is kind of yellowy all overall, but also has some kind of brown, gray, green tones, a little bit of olivey in it. But that yellow eye ring going on is really interesting, and it's not a white eye ring like maybe a Nashville warbler might have. Nashville warbler tends to have a different sort of grayer hood going on as well, but that yellow eye ring, the kind of overall dingy olivey yellow to me makes this an orange crown.
Okay, so now you say an eye ring, but is it an eye ring?
It's not quite. It's like it looks, at glance, and if I was only seeing it closely, I might call it an eye ring. That's a good call out, but it's kind of like pinched. It's like
Yes.
crescents, a little bit like the MacGillivrays, but they look fuller to me.
Yeah, and that dusky eye line is dividing it
Oh, right. Yeah,
into
yeah.
two little arcs or crescents there. So distinctive pattern. Great, great. The orange crown warbler. Now, yeah. So if this was a female MacGillivrays, which you probably would not see perched up in a spot like this,
Unlike an agave.
but
Yeah.
if it were a female MacGillivrays, we would have brighter eye arcs without that
Yeah.
line through the eye. It would have a hooded kind of effect of the male MacGillivrays, but drabber and
Yeah.
generally not yellow on the throat or yellowish on the throat. So cool, orange crown warbler. All right, so we're working our
Uh-oh.
way to the end here now.
Okay.
This one's got
So
an eye ring.
yeah, this one's got a full white eye ring. It's a very gray bird, and it's kind of really pointy bill.
Wasn't Lucy's warbler gray with a bit of a
Very
subtle eye
gray,
ring?
yeah, but that bill is it's long and pointy, and I can kind of see the tail. It's
Ah,
it's a little tricky to see, but I can imagine that this bird is flicking its tail around. And I see a black tail with white outer tail feathers going on in there. I think this is a gnatcatcher.
gnatcatcher. You mean it's not a warbler?
I don't think
Oh
this is a
no.
warbler, although like if I was looking at some warblers, I
It's a
might I
small
might encounter
active,
it.
it's a
Yeah.
small active little bird, similarly sized to the warblers, but with a longer tail and tail action and those white outer feathers and distinctive blue-gray coloration above, which we can't appreciate so much in this picture here. But yeah,
Yeah,
good,
yeah.
good catch. Uh-oh, somebody's calling out another
Oh
warbler up
boy.
there.
Okay, so again, we're thinking, could this be our more gray warblers like our Lucy's or our Virginias, right? And I don't think it's either of those. I think you're trying to trick me again. Um, so a Virginia's warbler, I would hope to see a little bit of the orange on the head and some yellow on it.
Right.
Um, this one, he's got a cute tiny little bill. It's very round, kind of round shaped, which to me says this isn't a warbler. And I see some wing bar going on there. We've got gray on the back with kind of an olivey front. This, even though I can't see anything on top of the head, this looks like a ruby crown kinglet to me.
Yeah, smaller bill, smaller bird, different wing pattern than the warbler, short little tail. If you saw it in life, of course, it'd be that the distinctive kind of flitty activity of a
Yep,
kinglet is, well, warblers are very active. Kinglets take it to almost to another level
for sure.
when
Yeah.
they're active. So good
You can
catch
almost
on that.
see it moving in this photo.
Exactly, exactly.
Uh-oh. Well, we definitely didn't study any of these.
I think
Uh,
this is an eastern warbler that we didn't look at.
oh yeah. Okay, so it's migration, right? So we're seeing this bird up in the tree, or maybe it's a little later in the summer even. And yeah, so I don't think this is a warbler. The bill on it is really thick looking to me. And it's got just kind of a different shape. It's got a dark back. I see those wing bars. That's really interesting, and kind of a pale throat and belly. It looks just kind of white and gray. It's hard to tell. I don't see any like yellow on the sides of it anywhere. Like there's not much yellow on this bird. It's all kind of
Hmm.
gray and white. But that eye, the sort of almost ring that kind of extends out to the top of the bill, is really interesting. So to me, this looks like a Plumbeus vireo.
Excellent. So yeah, so warbler would the vireos have a little bit, at least the ones in the Plumbeus group, have a little bit bigger looking head, and as you say, the
Yeah.
vireos generally have thicker bills than warblers, and that distinctive spectacle pattern on the it's like glasses, right?
Yeah,
Holding glasses across the brow of the nose there, so it's typical of the Plumbeus vireo. So we don't see any warblers with a face pattern matching
that's
that. There
true.
is one other little detail. Vireo bills have a little hooked tip, which is distinctive
Oh.
for the Vireo family. But that's something you might see in if you had a nice photo that you were looking at. But by that time, if you could see it that well, you would have already figured out what it is. All right, so you
Yeah.
did excellent and let it fly this time, Laura. I think you got 100% there. So I'll call you back for next time. And I want to say thank you to all of my photographers who have contributed images and given permission to use their work to make bird bombs happen. I could not do bird bombs without the photographers, so thank you very much. I'd like to invite anyone to become a bird bombs photo contributor. If you let me know via email that you would like to do that, I can access photos you have on eBird directly. It's very easy. So thank you to the photographers. And our next bird bombs is coming right up. It's going to be called Tropical Color on June 20th. And so we're going to be focusing on the idea of Colorado's orioles, buntings, grosbeaks, and tanagers. So more colorful birds like the warblers, but even more so, I think. And you might be thinking, well, heck, these birds are easy to identify. Look at these males. Well, if you bring the females into it, it's not necessarily as easy. So there's definitely some ID challenges in this group. So be looking for a tropical color June 20th. You can already register on the DFO page for that. So I'm going to stop my screen share and we'll see if we have any questions or comments to deal with.
Yeah, so and if you do have questions or thoughts, please drop them in the Q&A. I'm happy to relay them to David. Our first question from Susan is it incorrect to say wobbler or woobla? And I think I probably mispronounced those both, as the Brits do.
Yes, it's incorrect.
It's
We must
incorrect.
pronounce everything like we do wherever we are in the US. If you're from New England, you have wobblers, we hear it pronounced a lot of different ways. So there you go.
Nice. David, do you have a favorite of this collection that we've talked about tonight?
I really love them all, but I think if the first one that came to my mind was the Ovenbird out of the ones here, because like I say, it's kind of special having that distribution away from the whole rest of its range, this little island of Ovenbirds along the Front Range edge. And they live right sort of quote unquote in my backyard. I can hike up the
Mm.
trails where I live and get up into Ovenbird territories. They're returning just about this time of year. So I like the Ovenbird a lot. Plus they're beautiful and their song is so cool.
Nice. And then We've talked a lot about where these birds are distributed, kind of on their breeding range. And we talked a little bit about how they nest. Do you have any advice for observing or finding these warblers nesting and kind of watching them and learning?
Yeah, so I put a lot of emphasis on the different habitats that the birds are associated with. And if you want to find these birds, you want to be paying attention to what is the habitat you have, or going to seek them out in appropriate places and kind of being aware of that. So that's going to be a first step, is to put yourself in the right places for the species you're interested in. And then for photos or for getting good looks, it's mostly a matter of being out a lot and encountering different birds, or just taking some time. Especially you can find places that are quiet, that don't have too much trail traffic or are not along a road. Find a quiet trail, not always so easy to do. Um, and spend a little time with the birds, let them reveal what they're doing. Um, is kind of what you need to do. So these birds are pretty responsive to playback, especially territorial males. Using recorded songs to draw them in is one way to get a good look at them. You want to be careful not to do very much of that, not to do it for very long. In some places where you feel birds are subjected to a lot of people on a regular basis, perhaps playing recordings at them, maybe you don't do it at all and you make a little sacrifice there. But that is a good way to get a good look. Another thing to remember is that the singing birds make themselves visible. That doesn't mean they're easy to find or spot, but they're out in an open spot, often singing on top of something, or at least from an open setting and not crammed down in a bunch of leaves or hiding away in the bushes. So when you have a singer, that's going to be one that you can probably get a look at. And they tend to be at one spot for a little while when they're singing, on a favorite song perch. So it gives you a chance to, zoom in on them.